In this final talk about Kandinsky that's taking place after your first test, I just wanted to cover a little bit about the context of Kandinsky and when this was painted. So, when this was painted, Kandinsky's in Russia, and Russia is becoming a world superpower. And so it's actually pretty cosmopolitan. It's not backward at all. I mean, there's jazz clubs going on and modern fashion and a real interest at the turn of the century in having a modern lifestyle. So modernism, which really kind of celebrates looking to new ideas, looking to new things. Modernism in art is this idea that you can't go back and do things the old ways because we now have, like electricity and transatlantic travel and cars and airplanes are being invented. And so things are speeding up. And doing things the old school way just isn't working anymore. It would be very similar to what's happening now, where you have people where maybe 50 years ago they weren't using computers, they weren't digitally literate, they want to do things old school like write letters and read books. And now with the digital tech stuff, things are different. They're really, really speeded up. You kind of think about things entirely differently. You don't have to be told in great detail a lot of things because it's at your fingertips. So in modernism, at the turn of the century, as you enter into the 1900s, it's this idea that things are speeding up, that new ideas are there, and some of the new ideas are so advanced that you don't really understand them yet. Just like today, you might have some technology that's the latest, greatest thing, and you're interested in it, but you don't know, say when you buy a device, everything it's going to do, right? But you're interested in trying it out. So this idea of trying out new things being faster, things being speedier, having new ideas that you're not quite sure where they're going to lead you to. Kandinsky is definitely part of that modernist movement. So when he paints things very quickly, it's a sign of the times. Automobiles and planes, you're speeding up. When he gives you kind of an impression of things, or he's kind of giving you just this vague abstract idea of something and you've got to run with it, you got to figure out how you're going to use it on your own. That's part of what Kandinsky's doing on the intentionally. As a matter of fact, he's part of this movement called the avant-garde, AVANT-GARDE. It's a military term, and it's the scouts that you send out front that kind of scope out the territory. And there was this idea at the time that instead of artists painting for patrons or painting traditionally or following traditions, that the job of the artist was to be visionaries and to kind of move forward ahead of society. So they had to be kind of on the fringe. They're not mainstream. And by being on the fringe and being the forward thinkers, the visionaries at the time, that was their role for society. Not being traditional or behind the times. And so with all the new inventions that were happening, the telephone and, like I say, the cars and the automobiles and the airplanes, things like that, there had to be somebody in society that was willing to really break the rules and kind of be out on the fringe and kind of question things and try to figure out new ways of thinking, looking, doing, being more visionary. And Kandinsky really, really was a part of that. So he's part of the modernist movement and the avant-garde in Russia that was trying to become a world power. Now, the way you become a world power is you have a big military and you got a government that sends its military out into other countries and, builds a strong defense system. Well, Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra are the king and queen of Russia at this time. If you have ever been to the Virginia Museum and seen the Fabergé eggs, those are the Easter eggs that are like made out of diamonds and platinum, and they have gold and pearls and emeralds and sapphires on them, and Tiffany Jewelers created these like amazingly intricate, extremely valuable Easter eggs. And that was the kind of thing that the king would give his kids, the Tsar would give his kids or his wife at Easter as little Easter eggs, these like incredibly jeweled encrusted gold eggs. Well, most of the people in Russia were really, really poor at that time. And there had been several events that had made job opportunities dry up. People couldn't afford food. They were being really taxed heavily, and part of the reason they were being taxed heavily was because of the overreach of the government, and the government having a really strong military. And so you're being taxed to death, and the taxes are so much, and the unemployment is so high that you have a lot of food scarcity, hard to get a job, hard to pay the bills, hard to get ahead. And yet here you have this, king and queen, this Tsar and Tsarina, that are living on a very high lifestyle and flexing their power. And so there was already a lot of civil unrest in Russia. And it would not be too off to compare it to America, a little over 100 years later, where, the 1% is really super wealthy and is really controlling the economy, and the 99% of us don't have that much money, and a good portion of that 99% is really struggling to make ends meet, living on minimum wage, don't have a real strong future. Maybe, if you don't go to college, you go into the military because it's the only thing that really pays. Well, that is not too far from what was happening in Russia. And the way that our country is divided right now is not too far from a connection of how Russia was divided at this time. They have not yet had a civil war, which will happen in a few years, but they definitely have civil unrest. And so the country is divided. So if you see our country divided as some people who are loyal to one form of government, or maybe the ones who are loyal to Trump, and then there's other people who are loyal to another party. Maybe they're, Democrats versus Republicans, or Oath Keepers versus BLM. So the country's divided and is becoming more polarized. And people are really unsure what to do. They love their country, but they can't continue the way they are. So Nicholas and Alexandra are kind of abdicating. They're not really paying attention to the domestic troubles. They're indulging in their rich lifestyle. Well, the Bolsheviks start forming, and the Bolsheviks are a party of the people who feel like they want to defend the country, and that the direction that the country is going in really needs a radical change. A few years later, the Bolsheviks are going to get so strong that they come in to the Tsar's castle, and they kidnap Tsar Nicholas and Alexandra, and I think it's 8 girls, 1 boy. They kidnap their kids, and they take them into a basement and hold them hostage, and this blow their brains out. It's a bloodbath. They wipe out the entire Tsar's, regime. That would be like militia coming into the White House, and whether they took Trump and his whole family and just blew their brains out, or Biden and his family and blew their brains out, that's pretty much what was going to happen in a few years. And so Kandinsky doesn't know yet that that's going to happen, but he knows that there's a lot of tension in the country, and that there's problems, and that people are anxious and afraid. And so now you might look at this painting and go, okay, well, the Bolsheviks are starting to rise up. And it's a really confusing, tense time, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. So when I look at the imagery in this painting, I see a lot of chaos. I don't know what's happening. I might be able to recognize this horse, this power that's rising up, like the people who are trying to rise up. But just like you might look at a BLM protest, and see both peaceful protest and angry protest. It's kind of disorganized and chaotic. It's kind of not all real solid there when you take a look at it. And a lot of people are kind of laying back and just watching what's happening. So that would be the lovers in the lower right-hand corners leaning back and watching things happen. We see Tsar Nicholas and Alexandra in the top right-hand of the painting, who are kind of distant from everybody. We see the empty castle that's the government not really acting in the way that the people want. We see the Bolsheviks dividing the picture plane, and then we see that horse that's turning its back on the castle, the government, and rearing up. We see hope sinking and being lost. Now, you could talk to your history professor or go online and look at Russia during this time period and kind of say, okay, what were the main events? What were the main things happening in Russia at this time? And then look at the painting and see if you can find a correlation. And Kandinsky doesn't want to take a photograph of the people or a photograph of the events. He wants to capture the feeling of it, the idea of it, the anxiety, the chaos, the division, because it's not just a painting about Russia at this time. If you're using extensionality, where one artist reaches inside and really has a deep feeling and then produces music, a song, or artwork that speaks to people, it's not just speaking about one event, it's speaking about human conditions, how you feel, what's happening. So this idea that, if you don't want to repeat history, you have to know it. If you don't look at history, you'll unwittingly repeat it. Well, what happens if you look at this painting and it's like, I understand what's happening in Russia, but when I look at it today, from my viewpoint, can I relate to this as a human being, not as though it's a historical point in time? So this gives you both the context and some concepts about Kandinsky's Composition 4, and you could look at the history of Russia and talk about how this painting captures that moment in time. Or you could look at the history of this time and think about what I'm saying and then see if it relates to things right now. I mean, I guess you could also relate it to COVID because there is a lot of division in the country. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of unknown factors. The thing is that as you start to think more deeply about this painting, you may have some reactions. And some of the things I talk about might be like, not interested. And then other things I talk about might be, yeah, that's kind of cool. Well, those are reactions, not interested, uninterested. But you have to then go from reacting or absorbing and applying and analyzing to actually forming an opinion. So you would need to know this background in order to form a well-informed opinion. I had somebody in one class that really thought that those 3 red dots were chickens. And then they took the idea that 3 is a spiritual number like Trinity, and they talked about, this is a symbol of holy chickens, Christian holy chickens of the Trinity. And I was just shaking my head. It's like, this is so poorly informed. You're just grabbing at, 3 means, spirituality, and red means love, and they look like chickens, and, it's putting things together in a way that sounds like nonsense. So while you can have your own opinion of this painting, you will have a poor opinion if it's not well informed. I don't think you have to do a whole history lesson here or delve in to every detail of Russian history at this time, but you definitely need to understand the context of the painting. Kandinsky is a musician. He's interested in psychology. He's interested in music. He's part of, a culture that's undergoing change. All of those things you need to at least understand before you develop your own concepts to have a well-informed opinion. So, take notes on these 3 discussions, these 3 recordings. Don't just keep the recordings and think you're going to refer to them later. I think that's going to be just way too much work for you at the end. But I do think that if you have gone through these 3 recordings, taken notes, maybe look at the study guide that you used for the test and think, okay, my visual literacy at the beginning of this was probably, you might be laughing about it right now, right? You looked at this the first day, it's like, I can't even tell. And now as I talk, you understand a bit of what I'm saying, or a lot of what I'm saying. If you make notes now based on the study guide and what you understand, and what you understand about what I'm talking about in these recordings, and then you look at the painting again, just open up a file, start a document, start typing up your notes so that the last week of classes, you're putting it all together. I will be doing a revisit of this painting probably 2 more times during the semester for our major test, so we will be adding to this. So it is important that you capture this right now so that next part doesn't get confusing. Hope this helped. Okay? Good.